The Call of Abram. This is part 10 of our Genesis series. We are now in chapter 12. Last time we talked about the flood and how everything was reset. Now we're going to meet a man named Abram, who's going to play a very important role in the plan of God. Verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." This is a call to adventure. God calls Abram out of his homeland. God calls Abram out of his family, away from everything that was familiar to him, to a land that he had never seen before. God says, "I'm going to show you the land." God showed it to him in a vision, so Abram knew where he was going. There are three things that God promised Abram in this passage: land, descendants, and blessing. And those three things were given to him in the order that I just mentioned them in. But notice how the order is reversed in verse 7. In verse 7, God says, "I will give all these descendants, all these people, all this land that you see to you and your offspring after you, to your offspring as a possession forever." So God gave him blessing. Then he gave him land, and then he reminded him of the descendants. So there's kind of like a little chiasm here with blessing, land, descendants. Notice how the order is reversed. So Abraham goes on this journey, and we're told that he built altars along the way in verse 8. So verse 8 says, "And Abram set out, taking his father's household with him, and they went forth together, all of them, to go into Canaan. Then Abram passed through the land until he came to the place of the altar." So, as they're journeying, as they're going to this new land, Abram stops at different places and builds an altar. The word for altar in the Hebrew is the word mepharash, which means elevated thing. It's something that's raised up. He built an elevated thing, or he built an altar at each one of these stops. And he did that 3 times as they were going through the land. And then finally they get to this place where God had directed him to go, and he built an altar there. Some people think that Abram traveled all the way to Egypt. And if you look at verse 10, it says, "And it came to pass in that day that Pharaoh called Abram's name, called Abram, he blessed him, saying, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." If Abram went all the way to Egypt, then Pharaoh would have known who Abram was, and maybe even known the God of Abram. But I don't think that that's what happened here. Instead, I believe that Abram only traveled as far as the border of Egypt. I believe that when God said go into Canaan, that doesn't mean go all the way into Canaan. Sometimes in Scripture, the border is considered to be part of the land. And so I think that's what happened here. They didn't go into Canaan, but they got to the border of Canaan, and then Abram built the altar there. Now, once he gets to this place where he builds the third altar, he's going to receive God's covenant promise in the next chapter. But here in chapter 12, he received God's call, and he responded to that call by faith and by obedience, taking his family and all of their stuff and going on this journey. Hey Abram, do you remember when God called you? Do you remember when God called you out of your homeland, out of your family, to follow him to a place that you had never been before? Yeah? Do you remember that? Yeah. Do you remember the promises that God made to you? Yeah. Land, descendants, blessing. Yeah. And do you remember the order in which he gave those promises? Blessing, land, descendants. Yeah. Well, guess what? God just reminded you of that in reverse order. He reminded you of the descendants, the land, and then the blessing. And he reminded you of the blessing by giving you a new name. Yeah. What's my new name? God. Your name shall no longer be Abram. which means exalted father. Your name shall be Abraham, which means father of many. Hey, Abraham, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode and want to know when the next episode comes out, make sure you subscribe. Also, if you want to partner with us and help us get the gospel to more people, you can give to our ministry. Until next time, thanks for watching.